Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for tuning into today's webinar. This is a series of webinars for the Invasive Species in Agriculture project. My name is Torin Kelly, and I am the lead special projects at the Invasive Species Council, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we're all joining today from different traditional territories across the province. But I'd like to recognize personally that I'm very grateful to be joining from the traditional and ancestral territories of the Kwantlen and Casey First Nations, who've stewarded the lands and waters in what is now called Maple Ridge since time immemorial. We've got an excellent presentation today from Dr. Catherine Tarasoff of Agrowest Consulting Scientists. But just before we begin, I do want to go through some quick Zoom housekeeping items. For those of you that are more than familiar, you're going to hear this once again, but for those of you who might be newer to Zoom webinars, I just want to go through some of this stuff. So if you're experiencing any technical problems with Zoom, please use the chat box. Mel, our ISCBC tech wizard in the background there, will do her best to support you to get through those issues. If you have questions about Catherine's webinar throughout the presentation, please type in your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. So there is a chat box that we will monitor. So if you end up typing your question in there, we will do our best to keep track of that. But just for the sake of consistency, please do try to type your questions into that Q&A box at the bottom. We'll be taking time at the end of the presentation to answer questions. At time permitting, we'll answer as many as we possibly can. And those that don't get answered in today's webinar, we will do our best to answer and send to you along with the recording of today's webinar, probably about a week from now, give or take. And other than that, the webinar will be available on our YouTube channel. So if you are interested or you think anyone of your colleagues might be interested in reviewing what we talk about today, that link will be attached to that as well. But I am super excited to introduce our speaker for today. So Catherine Tarasoff, PAG, owner of Agrowest Consulting Scientists. Catherine is graduated from Thompson Rivers University in 1998, after which she attended Oregon State University and earned a PhD in crop sciences with an emphasis on weed science and a minor in rangeland ecology in 2007. Dr. Tarasoff went on to become the invasive plant ecologist at Michigan Technological. Oh my gosh, I just gotta slow down a little bit here, Catherine. Michigan MTU. She moved back to British Columbia and runs her own consulting company, as well as holding an adjunct position at Thompson Rivers University in the Department of Natural Resource Sciences. She has been a professional agrologist for over 20 years. Catherine works with forage producers across the province and wrote the guide to on-farm demonstration research for the BC Forage Council. But in today's webinar, Catherine will start by reviewing the foundations of integrated weed management. Then she will go through Forage 101 principles, how to incorporate the foundations of integrated weed management into your forage management practices, creating a resilient forage stand. She'll present one case study from northern forage producers and how he greatly reduced his weed abundance using multivarietal alfalfa blends. Catherine, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Torin. I know that's a mouthful. I'm going to quickly share my screen.
We just have to get all we need to share with everyone how experienced you are, Catherine. So even though it's a mouthful, it's great to hear how much experience you have.
Yeah, thanks, Torin. And thanks for inviting me. So I know that we have a super diverse audience joining. So some things may seem to some people like review, and other things might seem like, you've never heard of this jargon before. I'm going to skim across a few concepts, and if it's something where you want to dive deeper, we do have the workshop next week in Williams Lake, and we'll go into some more detail or deeper detail on some of these topics at that workshop. So I hope there's something for everybody tonight. And my primary focus, the thing I always come back to is this figure, which some of you might be familiar with the IPM house model, which is I took it out of the presentation because I don't like to present things and then say how horrible they are. But so this model is one that I developed about 10 years ago, because it makes a lot of sense to me about how to look at anything that you're trying really to manage. And this is what we're going to go through when we talk about IPM, Integrated Pest Management, which is just a process for managing a pest, whether it's a weed, whether it's a disease, whether it's a fungal pathogen, insect. It doesn't really matter what it is. A pest is something that you just don't want. And it's a process for how to manage that, um, to get the best outcome for what you do want, whether it's better fisheries, whether it's better forage, it doesn't really matter. So I always start with goals. And it is really important when you're talking about your goal. And so now we're getting into forage. So I'm going to try to focus on forage, to focus on what you do want, not what you don't want. If you don't want weeds and you put all your energy into focusing on getting rid of weeds, you will be spending your whole career getting rid of weeds because you never get past the weeds. So, for example, here, what is your end goal for the site? And for example, it could be diversity, it could be reduced stream sedimentation and stream stabilization, could be increased yields. So, how are you going to measure whether you're getting to your goal? So, if your goal was to stabilize a stream and reduce the sedimentation going into that stream, um, you might be like, okay, well, first thing I need to do is I got to get rid of these weeds. And that's fine. But then what? Oh, I need to plant restoration species. I need to put a fence in to keep my cows out. I need to put in offsite watering so my cows don't go in the streams. So getting rid of those weeds was just one step. There are other steps that you also need to take to help you reach that goal. And then how will you measure whether you're being successful or not? So you need to have some sort of measurement. Stream sedimentation is easy. You just take a water sample and you can look at sedimentation in it. Forage yields are easy. You throw some hula hoops out and look at what kind of yields you're getting. Um, there are always measurements that you can take that will inform you as to whether you are reaching this end goal. But make your goal positive. It has to be a positive goal, and then you can start the process. And one of the processes is likely going to involve getting rid of weeds. Okay, the next step in that cycle is prevention and monitoring. So you know what you want from the site, and let's say your site is I want to improve yields. Then first you have to understand what fields are in good shape, what fields are in bad shape, what fields are already healthy and they look fantastic, and what fields are in a weakened condition and are susceptible to invasion. In order to do this, you have to walk the site that you're concerned about and sketch a map. Identify good, healthy, it's good to look over the fence to see, oh, my field looks kind of weak. Oh, uh-oh, what could possibly be coming in? Oh, my neighbor's got a lot of this and a lot of that. I see sulfur cinquefoil. I see spotted knapweed. I see Canada thistle over there. Okay, that gives you an idea of what's healthy, what's at risk, what's likely to invade your at-risk sites. The next thing is make a plan. So it doesn't mean that you turn your back on the healthy areas. You have to continue to monitor them. You have to continue to make sure they stay healthy. Prevention is the cheapest investment you can make in forage. Or in anything really to do with weeds. If you can prevent them in the first place, that's the best investment of your time and your money. So here's an example of a field. This is a student drew this up in a class that I was teaching, and I thought it was good because it's true to life. This is the type of map you might draw for your fields. And you can see here she's put loafing areas. So this is where the cows are hanging out. She's put her roads in. She's put her water source where she puts her water. She's got this river in the back. She's got railroads. And then you can see she's put in like here's quack grass, oxeye daisy. She's got a bit of knapweed over here. Ooh, she's got some Canada thistle. So you can start to see where the weeds are, see what parts of the fields are healthy, where are weeds popping up, which weeds. Um, you may go out to your fields and say, well, I know where the forage is, but um, I know this isn't a forage species, but I don't know what it is. Um, in that case, you have to identify what you have. Correct ID is critical. If you don't know what it is, how can you even start to manage it? So when you ID what you've got, these are the types of questions you could be asking yourself about this plant. I like to say keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So you have to understand the weeds that you have and you have to be able to identify them because your management, how you manage the field, is going to impact how these weeds respond. Next, you need to understand the ecology of the ecosystem. Your forage field is an ecosystem. What are the soils? Is the soil condition favoring the weeds? There are many weeds that not thrive, but survive in compact soils. So they're able to outcompete your forage plants under compact soils or saturated soils or salty soils. Um, What's the precipitation and growing conditions like? Is the moisture or lack of moisture favoring the weeds? And are you able to manipulate your conditions through irrigation, fertilizer amendments? So this is a stage where you're like, I see that there are weeds here. My forage fields are still relatively healthy, like I'm still getting decent yields. Um, am I able to just try to tip the favor over into my forage and prevent the weeds from getting worse? So these are things you can think about, like, am I getting my irrigation on it at the right time? Am I getting good coverage across my fields? Do I need to take soil samples and apply more fertilizer or different fertilizer, or the timing needs to be changed? These are all questions that you can ask yourself because they're all site specific. So I'm not going to go into specific details about what to do in this situation or that situation. These are just questions that you ask yourself and look at your site critically. Also ask yourself critically, am I doing something that's making this worse? So a lot of people, it's easy to like point the finger at the previous landowner and say, oh, you know, when I bought this farm, it came with all these weeds. But what are you doing to either make it better or making it worse? Okay, so once you know what weeds you have and you have a good understanding of how they're performing under the conditions that they're growing in, then you need to come up with tools. And we have four main tools for that we focus on for controlling invasive species. So the one that you're actually supposed to use last, but most people use it first, is chemical weed control. So in forage, and I'm talking about a perennial kind of alfalfa hay stand. I'm not going to touch on annual forages like corn or, you know, oats and peas. So when you're, because most people are dealing with perennial forage stands, um, your chemical tool is really only useful at the field preparation stage. So when you're completely reseeding, and it's time to kill off whatever you've got, and you're going to reseed the field. Um, Once you've seeded that field, especially if you're doing alfalfa and grass, chemical weed control becomes pretty much that tool is gone because herbicides either kill everything like Roundup or they are selective to broadleaves or they're selective to grasses. Well, you have a broadleaf and a grass field. So the selectivity option there is pretty much gone. So you can use chemicals in the beginning to get the site ready, which is great because you need to do a lot of site prep before you're going to seed. Biological weed control, we typically think about insects. We also, you can train cows to eat weeds and you can train goats to eat weeds. Those are also biological weed control, but they're not used extensively in forage, nor is or are insects. Those insects are used more like out on range, not on forage fields. Mechanical, physical, weed control, pulling, tilling, mowing, those are all great again at the establishment stage of reseeding a field. Obviously, you're not going to till up your 2 or 3 year old forage field because that's a waste. Why would and you're not going to go out and hand pull every weed in a 100-acre field. So, and mowing, you have to understand that when you mow, it's not selective. So unless you get out there with a weed whacker and you're like, like a vacuum cleaner picking up popcorn on your carpet, most people are not going to use mowing in a selective way like that. So when you mow, you're also harming your crop, your forage field. So the last one that we come to, cultural weed control. And cultural weed control is making the site inhospitable to weeds to germinate, establish, reproduce, and continue to spread. This is what I call the big bubble. This is the most important tool that we have in forage. We have to focus on having a healthy forage stand so that it becomes inhospitable to weeds. So the big bubble, plants need 4 things to grow. They need water, soil, sunlight, and space. If you remove one of those factors, a plant can't survive. It might be able to germinate, but it can't actually establish and grow. So when you're looking at your fields and you're thinking about what to do, think about what plants need to grow. They need these 4 things. Is it possible for you to remove one of these things from being available for the weeds? And space is one that people always forget about, but this is competition. So if you have a healthy, robust, really solid stand, there is no space available for weeds. So they cannot access, the seed cannot hit the soil. If it does hit the soil, it's so like shaded, there's no sunlight. And then even if it can access water, it doesn't matter because there's no sunlight. So when you think about the planet, realize that there are plant seeds everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. So even if you have a really healthy forage stand, there are still weed seeds in there. They just haven't had an opportunity to germinate. So you want to make sure that you have no disturbance and you do not weaken your forage stand because there are weed seeds waiting for that opportunity to hit the soil for a little bit of space to access the water and have sunlight and enough to grow. So keep your forage stand healthy. Okay, I want to do just this quick little case study to show you what a producer did in Vanderhoof before I move on to talking about kind of like how to start from scratch with seeding. So this is just a cycle that we put together that explains what's happening up in Vanderhoof. It's happening all over. If you're in the Caribou, same thing. The interior, and probably maybe not on the coasts because you don't get freezing temperatures over the winter. But in the interior and beyond, we're dealing with this same scenario. You go into the winter and there's low snowpack, or the snow comes late. That results in frozen soils. Frozen soils make a plant like alfalfa, which is called our queen of forage, makes a plant like alfalfa really susceptible to winter injury, winter kill. The soils are frozen. There's barely any snow buffering and insulating the ground. Then in the spring, the ground has to defrost. So the ground is frozen. The snow melts. The water runs off the surface of the ground because the ground is frozen. It doesn't go into the ground. So you've lost that water. That means that when the ground defrosts, the plants are growing in already a drought condition, which delays their growth. So they're growing, they're ready to get going, and the ground is dry. So it delays their growth. Normally, they would do their first cut. This is for a dry land forage producer, no irrigation. They would do their first cut in July, but with climate change, it's now raining in July. So that delays their harvest because the fields are too wet. Harvest gets pushed to August. Now the alfalfa is over mature. The protein values have dropped. Okay, well, you got to cut it anyways. So you cut it in August. But that means that the alfalfa is trying to regrow under moisture stress. Stress plants are prone to injury, means it goes into the winter already weakened because it had to regrow under a droughty condition. Less snowpack, frozen soils, around and around you go. And it only takes one particularly bad cycle where you could lose 50 to 80% of your alfalfa due to winter kill. Okay, so Wayne had already tried, this is my producer that I worked with, he'd already tried seeding a multivariety mix of alfalfa. So alfalfa is a species, but within that species, there are dozens, probably hundreds of varieties of alfalfa that you can choose. So he'd already tried a multivariety stand of alfalfa. He thought it looked pretty good, but what he didn't know was, could he have seeded at a lower rate? Is he wasting seed? How does a multivariety mix change his yields? You know, does he get more? Does he get less? Doesn't really know. And would a multivariety mix be more resistant to weeds? So in order to ask and address those questions, so this is part of my on-farm demonstration research that I do. We took his field, it was 50 acres and we divided it into 4 strips. There's a little picture there of what that cartoony looked like. 2 strips were seeded with 5 varieties of alfalfa all mixed together in one blend. And 2 strips were seeded with a single variety of alfalfa called Vision. And that was really popular at the time. And then he seeded that at low and high rates. The low rate was 12 pounds per acre. The high rate was 25 pounds per acre. Okay, so you can see that little diagram kind of outlines what that all looks like. And here's the results that he got. This is wet tons per acre on a single cut, his first cut. And across the bottom, we have Vision, low and high. And then we have that 5 variety blend, low and high. So right off the bat, you see that if you seed Vision at 25 pounds per acre, you get basically the same yield as doing the 5-way blend at 12 pounds per acre. So that's like, wow, you could save 50% right there. But if you, so that's one. And then if you seed it at the high rate, you get about 3.5 tons per acre. So the high rate definitely had higher yields. But what's important for this audience is this next one, is that when he's pulled out his weeds, and he's kind of exclusively an alfalfa producer, so he also took out any, volunteer grasses out too. Whether he seeded at the low or the high rate with a single variety, he had 40% weeds. Like that single variety is not providing any diversity that is competing with the weeds. Like I said, there's weed seeds just waiting, right? So they're everywhere. Um, he reduced the percent of weeds with the 5-way, even at the low rate. He got it down to about 25%. But this is really the take home. When he seeded the 5-way blend at the high rate, he reduced his weeds to less than 5% of his stand. And that's because 5 different varieties of alfalfa are growing in 5 different ways, have 5 different kind of rooting patterns, leaf height. They're accessing resources in basically 5 different ways. So they're able to do a better job of competing with his weeds. So that's all part of the on-farm demonstration research that I did with the BC Forage Council. You can find the case studies on my website. Okay, so step 1 is preventing weed germination. If you're in a situation where you're like, it's time to reseed this field, I know that um, the ground is covered in weed seeds. I know that I have lots of weeds growing already. It is so important now. You should start about a year in advance of seeding, so you should be doing this now to select the right blend, then the right seeding rate for your field. Make sure that you understand the biology of the plants that you want to grow and the ecology of the site. That means different plants have different requirements. Not all grasses are the same. They have different precipitation requirements. They have different salinity tolerances. Some are not at all flood tolerant. Others are incredibly flood tolerant. So make sure you get the right seeds. Take soil samples, fertilize if needed. Setting your site up for success is really important for the seeding because you only get one kick at this can, and then you're putting in a perennial stand. If you don't do it right at the seeding stage, you are going to be battling weeds for the next 5 to 10 years. Plants have different tolerances for grazing and haying. Make sure you understand that. I have a good table I'm going to show you. And then how will you be managing the stand? I have another table for that. So diversity, also realize that diversity leads to resilience and resistance. So that's the premise of Wayne's project that I just showed you. Yes, he only plants alfalfa, but he plants a diversity of alfalfa. So diversity doesn't always mean lots of different species. It can mean lots of different varieties of a single species. And that gives you resilience to weed invasion, resilience to disturbance, resistance to the weed invasion, resistance to disturbance. It just gives you the stand a lot, makes it like sort of like a super stand instead of being a wimpy stand. Okay, so this comes from the BC Rangeland Seeding Manual, an awesome resource available online, which has a variety of agronomic grasses here listed, agronomic legumes, their moisture requirements, their drought tolerance, their flooding tolerance, erosion control, uh, ability to suppress invasive plants. That's how competitive they are. and their forage qualities or enhanced forage qualities. So when you're thinking about what species am I going to plant, look at this table in this manual, because you want to make sure that you pick species that are going to survive under the growing conditions or the ecology of your field. Your field is an ecosystem, and you want to make sure that you get the best plants possible for that ecosystem. The next one is, how are you going to manage the stand? This comes from beefresearch.ca, which also has a fantastic amount of information. So understand that if you're using your forage species for continuous grazing, so that's like you just have an, like an open paddock and you let your animals just roam around and nibble, that's continuous grazing. Rotational grazing is where you divide it up into sections. I have another little mini slide on that. And then haying or some sort of hay harvest. So picking species that are suitable for how you plan to manage the field. You don't want to pick species that are going to suffer under your management practices. This is all sitting at your kitchen table stuff. You will get advice from your seed supplier, but they're not you. You manage your stands, how you manage them, and you have your own goals for your stands. So take what they tell you and then do your own homework and look at the information online. Now, a word of caution. I cannot stress this enough, and I don't want to go down a big rabbit hole about this, but when you are buying seed, seed comes a different quality seeds are produced. There's pedigree and all that kind of stuff, but more importantly, the certificate of analysis tells you how much weed seed is in that that it's done on lots. So like basically like let's just imagine a whole train car full of seed comes in. That could be a lot. That's the lot. It came off of one field. So it gets analyzed on the lot level, not the bag level. Your bag did not get analyzed, but the whole lot did. And it tells you what percent they found of weed seeds. Usually it's in like a 50-gram sample. Percent of other crops, that would be like volunteers. What percent is inert? I'm over here going down this. What percent is inert? That'd be like chaff, stems, just kind of garbage plant parts. What percent germinated and what percent is dormant or called hard seed? That means it's there, but it's not likely to germinate when you try to seed it. Now, we have a very confusing seed analysis kind of categories in Canada, but for you, the important thing is to ask for the certificate of analysis. They do not provide it. You have to ask for it, and it's important to ask for it so that before you pay for the seed, you can look at that certificate and decide if you want that seed or not. You do not have to buy it just because they gave you a certificate. And if the percent of weed seed comes back and you're like, yowzers, 8% were weed seeds, then you can ask what were the weed seeds that were found in this sample and decide if you consider those to be baby weeds or if you consider those to be really problematic. If you're buying your seed, most of our seed comes from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. That's where our seed producers are. So if it's got seeds that don't even exist in BC, or if you're buying it from Idaho or Colorado, you could be bringing in seeds that we don't even really have yet. And it's going to cause you a lot of hassles down the road. If it says common seed, you'll see that a lot. Common number one, common number two. That basically means it failed the certification process. They don't throw those seeds out, they just label them as common. If you buy common seed and you save 50 cents a pound to buy common seed, that is the worst thing you could do. The worst. You are getting seed that could be full of weeds to save 50 cents a pound. Pay the 50 cents, get good seed, and make sure you ask for the certification analysis. Okay, that's it for that. The next thing is these seed multi-species mixtures. Just be cautious about these. Like this looks great. Ooh, 20 species, 10 grasses, 10 legumes, 70% grasses, 30% legumes. So you might assume 70% of the grasses is equally divided among those 10. That's not true. 70% of the mix is grasses, of which there will be 10, those 10 species, but not in equal parts. Those 10 species can change based on what's available, what's cheap. So if you want to make sure that you're truly getting a blend that has the percent of what you want, you need to make sure that you buy a pre-mixed species blend that lists the species and the percent that you're guaranteed to get in the bag. Otherwise, you could get, of your 10 grasses, it could be dominated by brome grass. And you think you're getting a bunch of Timothy and you're going to get a bunch of wheat grasses, but really it's almost exclusively brome grasses because they were cheap. And so that's what went in the mix. So be careful about the multi-species mixtures. Make sure that you get a breakdown of what species and the percent of those species that are in the mix. Okay, now you've got, you're really confident, you know what you want, you've ordered it, you're waiting for your seeds to arrive. You got to get the seed bed and the field ready to be seeded. This is actually Wayne's field, him prepping it for his project. The seed bed needs to be smooth, firmly packed, moist, and weed free. Of course, there's weed seeds everywhere, right? Not weed free like you're promising there's going to be no seeds. It's full of seeds. But you want to make sure that your seeds are going to get access to the moisture, to the soil contact. So you make sure that you calibrate your seeding equipment to ensure that you're getting the right seeding rate and the right seeding depth. There's nothing worse than seeding something at the wrong depth and then you think it's going to germinate in 4 to 5 days and you're waiting and 2 weeks later it still hasn't emerged because you seeded it too deep. But guess what? All those weed seeds have emerged. They're going crazy. So it really becomes like fiercely competitive at this point. And having a really solid seed bed prep will help your seeds to grow sort of to their fastest potential. Okay, so that's all the things that you should do in order to get a good reseeding. If or once you're at the point where you have a decently healthy stand and you're really happy with how things are going, or you are starting to see, I need to protect what I've got. There's two approaches for managing plants, I like to think. There's if you're managing for grazing and if you're managing it for hay. So when you're managing a field for grazing, that kind of means you have your cows and horses out there sort of all season long, right? And those plants are available for them to eat all season long. So when you're thinking about your grazing management, you don't want to put your animals on a field until your plants are at least 15 centimeters tall. Plants are very susceptible to grazing in the spring and when they're small because they're using all their root reserves to really get going in the spring. So wait till they're 15 centimeters tall, then you can start grazing them. Then we have a take half, leave half rule around grazing. You want to take the animals off when they've taken 50% of the plant. So that's what this figure down on the right shows. If you take the animals off at 50%, then the roots don't stop growing. If you let the animals use 70%, half the roots will stop growing for 17 days. If you let the animals take 90%, all of the roots stop growing for 17 days. And you can see that the root mass is shrinking. So if you let your animals just continuously graze, they will go back to the best plants over and over and over again. And especially if you have horses that have teeth like toenail clippers, they will nip those plants, the best, most desirable plants, down to 90% or lower every opportunity they get. So that's why we talk about rotational grazing, and that's what the figure at the top is. This is a very, very simple rotational grazing setup. It can get a lot more complicated than this, and if you come to the workshop, we can cover rotational grazing designs in more depth. But in a nutshell, it's that you only give the animals access to a portion of the field at any time. So they can graze, and they can graze that section to 70% to 90%, whatever, ideally only 50. And when you hit that 50%, you move the animals over to the other side. So that you would move them over here. And then you ideally turn the water on and let that original half recover, let the plants grow. That's the rest and recovery phase. Once it's rested, recovered, it's got back to 15 centimeters tall, then you can take those cows and you can put them back over. So the cows are moving back and forth in this very simple rotational grazing scheme. But it's not just a matter of 1 week here, 1 week there. It's based on how fast the plants are growing. So at some stages, you might be able to move them every few days. Other times you might be like, oh my gosh, like what am I going to do? Everything's growing so slowly. The site isn't ready for me to put them back in, but where they are, they've eaten everything. Then you need to have some backup plans, right? You need to be able to move them to a different field, or you need to be able to throw some bales of hay over in a different field, ideally, and give that field a chance to recover. So you get much higher yields in a rotational grazing system, and the forage quality is better in a rotational grazing system, and the plants are healthier because they are not getting overgrazed and susceptible to weed invasion. Okay, if you're managing plants in a haying system, um, you should consider in that seeding that I was talking about, consider seeding it with a nurse crop because you should not harvest alfalfa in year one. So in year one, that's the establishment year. You take off the nurse crop and you let the alfalfa come up. You might take a little bit of alfalfa just depending on the growing conditions, but you're not intending to harvest alfalfa in year one. So once it's established, year two, the best time to harvest is between first flower and 25% flower across the field. This will give you maximum persistence of your stand. It might not give you maximum yield, but it will make your stand persist the longest. And we know that reseeding your stand is such a high risk, such a high expense, sort of thing that you have to do, that you want to keep your stand healthy as long as you can. So it might mean slightly different yields, slightly lower yields, but maximum persistence, maximum health. Okay, then if you practice aftermath grazing after you've taken your final harvest, you need to make sure that you allow 6 weeks for regrowth before that killing frost comes. So if you know a killing frost usually comes around the middle of October, you need to get the cows off that field the beginning of September so that those plants have a chance to grow to at least 6 inches to protect the winter buds going into the winter. Um, so it's very important that not only that the plants have the plant growth to protect the buds, but it also catches snow, and that snow will stay on the field and also contribute added protection in the form of hopefully preventing the soil from freezing. So 6 inches of stubble be going into the winter in a hay field, actually in any field. Okay, so now you've come around, you've implemented some of your tools and your practices, and you want to monitor success. So, in order to monitor success, you might go out with a forage stick, you might go out with hoops. You can use any tool that allows you to actually collect numbers and see how you're doing. And using that cultural weed control really hinges on a lot of understanding about your plants, your weeds, your forage, and the ecosystem, and kind of scrunching all that with your management objectives because plants respond to how you manage them. So they have to be suitable for how you plan to manage it. Right now is the perfect time for you to be planning all these things. Right now is the perfect time to be investigating seeds, to be going into those manuals and seeing what kind of seeds are going to actually survive under my growing conditions. Right now is a great time to go out and collect soil samples and send them off for analysis. We're right in the fall, the soils are kind of depleted. Right now is a perfect time to decide if you want to put in, cross fencing, electric fencing, if you want to try rotational grazing, how are you going to set your field up to be able to do rotational grazing effectively? So that's that is IPM, and it goes around and around and around. When you come back and you monitor your success based on the goals that you had set out, if you're not meeting your goals, you need to go back to this. What don't you understand about your system? You need to learn more about your system and try to understand how can I culturally protect the plants and how can I make sure that I get the best stand. If you are meeting your goals, but it's just not fast enough, like you're starting to see improvements, but it's not fast enough, then you can think about this too. What could I do? Do I need to seed at a higher rate? Do I need to get my cows off sooner? Do I need to irrigate more? Maybe I'm not getting perfect, really good overlap on my wheel lines. I need to get, move them slower, move them faster. And if you are getting the results you want, then keep on doing what you're doing. Things are improving, but it won't happen overnight. So it'll be a slow improvement. So this is basically, you can come back to this at any time during the process of figuring out what's going on in your forage and managing for the weeds. Okay, that's it. I hope I didn't, oh, 10 minutes.
I think it's going to work out just great, Catherine. Once again, thank you so much for coming. It was there's a lot of stuff that people can take away from that, I hope. And I believe, Catherine, you just as kind of a note to people, if they're interested in kind of more of your research trials, they can take a look at that on your Instagram. Is that right?
Yep, I'm on Instagram. I have my own website, agrowest.ca, and Agrowest is also my Instagram.
For sure.
You can find me on Instagram if you want to follow some day-to-day activities versus summaries. All the case studies are on my website.
Awesome.
Mhm.
We do have some questions here. The first one is, well, thanks for the presentation, Catherine. Are there any nurse crops that have shown to support better alfalfa growth rates in subsequent years?
That's such an awesome question. I'm so glad whoever asked that question, I'm so glad you asked that question. I just started an on-farm demonstration research project looking at using a diverse mix of cover crops. So some of you may be familiar with Covers & Co., and they have a full season cover crop blend, which has 20 species in it. Um, and so we just finished year one. Next year will be the real telltale year. But so we compared the Covers & Co. cover crop as the nurse crop to the alfalfa hay blend versus forage oats, which is a very standard nurse crop, forage oats. Um, and there's a few things I've noticed right away without even crunching the numbers or anything. The forage oats had weeds through the roof, like just crazy weeds. The cover crop really had such a lower number of weeds, and it makes sense, right? It all comes down to diversity. But then when the nurse crop was removed, and I went back and I looked at, just monitoring growth, um, the alfalfa under the forage oats was probably an inch tall, I would want to say, an inch to two, like it was like this. There was alfalfa under the cover crop that was 18 inches tall. It was the growth rate was just, and part of it, it's hard to tease it apart. Part of it is likely because there were fewer weeds. But I think that what's happening is that diverse cover crop is really stimulating the soil microbes, which are then feeding the alfalfa. So that healthy soil is leading to the healthier alfalfa. And next year will be the year, because this year's the establishment year. So next year will be the year where we really measure the abundance of alfalfa and the yields that they get, well, alfalfa and some grass species. Yeah, the yields that they get. So stay tuned. That'll be next year. That's in Armstrong. But I think that using these diverse cover crops as nurse crops shows a lot of promise. I think it's kind of blew my mind when I went out there and saw the difference in the alfalfa from having the forage oats versus the cover crop.
Well, I think I can speak for everyone. I'm glad you're doing that research, Catherine. That sounds like I'm very
Yeah,
excited to hear how that goes.
yeah, it's cool.
Next one here. A few different people had kind of mentioned this here. You didn't mention top seeding thin spots or established fields.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that practice of top seeding?
Yep, sure. Like y- absolutely, checking your fields and looking for thin spots and just doing top seeding, overseeding. Um yeah. B- uh, that's fine. Eventually you are going to have to probably reseed that field. Especially if something that you're doing is leading to those, if it's like you can only kind of band-aid it for so long, and then the field is probably going to need to be reseeded, or you need to change your management of that field. So, and when you do that, you need to be really aware that there's a lot of like those seeds are now also competing with whatever's established. So, getting the water, there probably is probably going to need extra water just so that there's enough resources for everything. So yeah, I only had so much time, but that is a really popular and common thing to do. But it's a little bit of a band-aid, and it will only take you so far, especially if there's something in your management of that field that is leading to these bare spots. Yeah, like especially if you have horses. If you have horses, rotational grazing is probably the best system you can set up for protecting your fields.
Um, we still have a little bit of time, so if you do have questions for Catherine, please put those into the Q&A chat. We just have a couple of notes here. So once again, Catherine, thank you so much for all the information that you brought to the group here today. I'm going to have Melanie put a very quick survey up on the screen. Please take some time to fill that out. We really want to know how this webinar series is helping you learn more about invasive species in agriculture. So if you can quickly fill that out, that would be great. Something else that is happening. So like this current webinar, we are having 2 more webinars that aren't totally related to forage, but we're having a really great speaker, Dr. Susanna Audrimpong, will be talking about invasive insect threats in British Columbia to tree fruit orchards and vineyards in BC. So if you yourself or someone you know might be interested, Melanie is going to put that link to register in the chat. And the piece de resistance here, Catherine had mentioned it a few times. We are hosting a workshop in Williams Lake next week on November 27th. We are going to be talking about all things forage, invasive species. Catherine's gonna, if you come, you can learn all about what you need to know from Catherine. She is a wealth of knowledge. So please come in, and we're happy to kind of work with the group to see what is of interest. I think is a really important thing that we can do at the workshop there. So there's a link in the chat. And yeah, I think we have another question here. Just lots of people have said, thank you so much, Catherine. Catherine's very, very useful information. Really appreciate it. So I've had 3 or 4 different groups of people say that. John, oh, here we go. They're flying in. Everyone wants to get it in at the last second here. I love it. From John, I was planning to heavily seed fall rye to try to beat out a bad Canada thistle infestation. Is it a good idea? And is there a better seed to use?
Okay, so Canada thistle is really tricky, John. uh, Canada thistle is rhizomatous, which means that when you till, you're going to chop it up into all these little pieces, right? And then all those little pieces are going to sprout. So if you till it, spray it, so that all those little pieces then um, don't form new plants. And then fall rye is great. Fall rye is very competitive. Um, so it'll be seeding that heavily to fall rye, but you're kind of late. Well, I don't know where you are. Maybe it's fine on the coast, but in the interior, you're pretty late. It's too late to seed fall rye. Um, but on the coast, it might be fine. Um, yeah. And then the nice thing too, if you're not an organic producer, if you are an organic producer, we need to, like, honestly, we'd have to have a different conversation. But if you're not organic, then you can also continue to manage that Canada thistle with herbicides in the spring until you till that fall rye under. So it's seeding a single species like fall rye does give you herbicide options for controlling the Canada thistle because it's incredibly difficult to control. And if you can get rid of it while you have it in a single grass like fall rye, then you can then flip it into a multi-species, multi-everything field later and know that the Canada thistle is taken care of. I hope that helped.
Okay. Let's do, so it's 8 o'clock now. There's a few questions here, and there's one that has a few likes. So let's just do this last one here, Catherine, if that works for you. And all the other questions we can send your way to get some answers for. So this one is from Lisa. Dealing with a field with toad rush, we have fertilized to change the soils and overseeded. Both have worked well, but not 100%. My question is, in the fall, when we leave the field shorter for winter, is this making the environment more friendly for the toad rush?
Hmm. What's toad rush? I don't,
Maybe perhaps they're thinking of toad flax, maybe.
yeah.
Lisa,
So,
if you, sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
yeah, I'm not familiar with toad rush. Like, is it an actual rush? Um, or is it toad flax? Um, is she a,
Perhaps, yeah, perhaps Lisa, if you see at the bottom, Lisa, there's a raise hand function. I'm fairly sure you'll have that on your side. If you do see that, go ahead and click that quickly, and then we can unmute you and you can clarify if that's helpful. Oh, here we go. I got the scientific name here for you.
oh no.
Uh, oh, here we go. You're gonna make me pronounce a scientific name in front of everyone, Lisa. Uh, Joncus
Oh,
buffonus.
okay. So it's truly a rush. So chances are there's something, so you need to understand the biology of that plant and what it might be indicating about your field. So there are rushes that are tolerant of like sort of flooded field conditions. There's rushes that are tolerant of salt conditions. It may be indicating a soil condition that you have um, that could be, like sort of confounding your forage's ability to grow healthily. So that would be my first sort of look up that plant and see what its tolerances are, and if it's an indication of soil condition. Um, if it doesn't seem, or if it does say like it can tolerate flooded soils or it can tolerate salinity, then you might consider taking a soil sample and sending it off for analysis to find out exactly how salty is my soil, exactly, like what am I dealing with here? Um, because that could be sort of a confounding variable to the whole equation. Yeah, so rushes can indicate things about the soil. You just need to know, that's not my specialty, but I do know that they are soil indicators, some of them. Um, and then depending on how low you're leaving the your forage going into winter, um, 6 inches is best. I know that sometimes there are circumstances where you do have to graze, like the price of forage is really expensive, but you're kind of rolling the dice because when they go into the winter, you can't predict when the snow is going to come. You can't predict how cold it's going to get. So leaving that 6 inches gives them the best chance of surviving and coming out of the winter as healthy and strong as they're capable of coming out. What was the other part in that question? Was there something else?
Sorry, let me pull it up here again. Dealing with field with toad rush, we've fertilized to change the soils and overseeded. Both have worked well, but not 100%. My question is, in the fall, when we leave the field shorter for the winter, is it making the environment more friendly for the toad rush?
Yeah. Yeah. So it could be, it could be a soils thing. Um, so, if you're fertilizing, that actually makes your soil saltier. So, if there is a salinity issue, you're going to need to find out that. And then, if you're grazing heavily and leaving the plants really short going into the winter, then absolutely it's gonna weaken your forage stand, and the rush it'll take whatever space it can get. Honestly, if there's any space, it'll take it. So leave your plants taller going into winter.
Okay, awesome. So 8:05, there are a couple questions we'll send your way, Catherine. But once again, thank you all for joining. And if you, like Melanie, or Melanie did not say this, but we will be including all the links to the workshops, the webinars, as well as a recording to the presentation that happened today. It'll also be hosted on our YouTube channel. That'll get sent out to you in all likelihood next week. So I hope everyone has a great night, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar and the workshop, right, Catherine?
That's right.
And the workshop. Make sure
The
you guys sign
workshop.
up for that workshop. Free lunch. It's going to be a good time.
Road trip to Williams Lake.
Road trip to Williams Lake.
Okay. Thanks,
Thanks a lot,
everyone.
everyone.